Finding an MMO is difficult. Seriously. I have been playing MMOs for approximately 17 years now, and having played pretty much everything that the genre has to offer, I often find myself drifting from game to game with absolutely no idea what I should be playing. Looking through the list of MMOs I have installed via Steam is a whole nother mood altogether. Now, 2021 has given us quite a few MMOs, and you know what? I appreciate that. But that does not mean that these MMOs are good or that we should necessarily be playing them going into 2022. But I mean, at the same time, it also doesn't mean that they're bad either. And while I have two different videos, one specifically pertaining to the most played MMORPGs in 2021, and another specifically targeting the best free-to-play MMORPGs in 2021. I don't have a list specifically catering to the action subgenre. I'm well aware that many MMO players are not really avid fans of tab target combat, and that is where this video comes into play. Today, we're taking a look at some of the best action MMOs available to play in 2021, going into 2022 with absolutely no restrictions. These are action games you should be looking to play if you're, well, looking for something to play. You know what else you should be looking at? That subscribe button and clicking it, of course. Especially if you're interested in staying up to date with MMO news like this every day, general MMO discussions, MMO giveaways, and if you feel I deserve it, drop a like and a comment on the video. It is a huge help for the YouTube algorithm. Now, these are not necessarily the best MMORPGs, but they are some of what I believe to be the best of their respective subgenre. So please do not misconstrue the purpose of this video. Let's start this off by talking about what many players argue is the pinnacle of the action genre, Black Desert Online. Now, not every one of you will agree that this is the greatest action MMO, and honestly, that is more than fine. Everyone's opinion is, after all, entirely subjective. Yet, regardless of whether you mirrored that sentiment, there's absolutely no denying the fact that Black Desert not only looks absolutely stunning, but it plays better than almost all of its competition. The world is large, it's open, and without any loading screens present. It offers players a diverse selection of life skills to preoccupy themselves with, and has an open-ended progression system. Yeah, you can just continue leveling literally indefinitely. Now, this is a very grindy game, but there's just so much to do, and the game is updated more frequently than almost any other MMO. So you can be sure there will always be content that warrants coming back to. Next, let's talk about Blade and Soul. When people discuss, and I use this term very loosely here, their opinions on what MMO features the best action combat, it typically comes down to two different games, Black Desert Online and Blade and Soul. Blade and Soul's combat differs to Black Desert's. Black Desert is kinda, I don't know, I guess spammy, requiring memory of different button combinations, whereas Blade and Soul utilizes your action bar to combo a much smaller selection of abilities together. After their recent Unreal Engine 4 overhaul, Blade and Soul looks better than ever. Character models look polished, loading times have been drastically improved. The game is in a better state than it has been in years. Unlike Black Desert, Blade and Soul utilizes a segregated world, connecting areas together via small loading screens. The game is an instance, but the areas aren't seamlessly connected. This is a highly narrative-driven game, but NCSoft are kind of sloppy and slow with their updates, so new content does take a very long time to come, often resulting in players spending months at a time in other games. Continent of the Ninth Seal, often just referred to as simply C9, is a hub MMO. What this means is that there is no open world for players to explore. Rather, the world exists as several hubs where you can take and complete various quests from different NPCs. You'll find plenty of other players within these hubs, or, well, you would if there were more players actively playing the game, but honestly, C9's population is pretty low. Nevertheless, traditionally, you'd find a large number of other players populating the hubs. From these hubs, you'd queue for a variety of different dungeons, and that's the bulk of the game. And you group up with other players, and you run dungeon content. This definitely is not for everyone, and there are better hub MMOs out there, but this is a great option if you've tried everything else there is to offer. Dragon Nest is one such alternative. Much like C9, Dragon Nest is a hub MMO. However, where C9 is pretty much entirely instanced, Dragon Nest has plenty of different areas to explore outside of each hub, areas that are connected to entirely new zones. These areas actually house multiple instances found within them, each with their own unique individual aesthetic. This was generally considered to be the PvP MMO, with many players often regaling me to this day with stories of the incredible feats they achieved. It's also one of the few MMOs that have a very large focus on narrative, something that the MMO genre really isn't very well known for. Okay, I'm honestly beginning to see a bit of a recurring theme here. A lot of hub MMOs actually employ an action combat system, and interestingly enough, a lot of hub MMOs also happen to utilize anime aesthetics. Huh. Who'd have thunk it? Dungeon Fighter Online might very well be the greatest hub MMO of all time in my opinion. Not only does it have some of the best looking and feeling combat, but it features more classes than any other MMO here. Not just classes, but advanced classes too. The sheer depth present in this game is almost unrivaled. There are a plethora of hubs present, so you never feel like you're stuck in the same area too long. Although I guess I should note that, unlike every other MMO in this list, Dungeon Fighter Online is a horizontal MMO, one of the few of its kind. I know this is definitely not going to appeal to everyone, but including the Chinese player base, there are several million players logged in concurrently at any point of the day, with tens of millions of active users daily. Elian is actually the most recent MMORPG to release, coming out just a couple weeks ago. Interestingly enough, while the game had some buzz around it when it went under the Ascent Infinite Realm moniker, when it launched as Elian, it kind of fizzled out, barely scratching 10,000 players playing it concurrently during its first week, something that even the largely hated Bless Unleashed still remained above for months after launch. This is a large MMO. It is entirely open. No loading screen splitting any of the game world up. Everything you see, you can run to without issue. Well, if players don't murder you along the way, as this is an open world PvP game. Graphically, Elian looks great. It plays great as well. Well, some of the classes do. Some of them are actually horrifically poorly designed and just feel terrible, but I mean, that is the case in the majority of MMOs anyway. Guild Wars 2 is arguably the only MMO in this list that, while definitely an action title, is also a unique hybrid blend. Yet, while not as flashy, not as fast, and not nearly as spammy as some of its competition, it also has one of the deepest, most customizable selections of classes available. Most MMOs provide you a weapon for your class, a sword and shield for paladin, a great sword or a great axe for warrior, a stave for mage. Yet Guild Wars 2 allows for a multitude of different weapons to be equipped per class, with each combination of weapons vastly altering your entire skill selection. Guild Wars 2 is also a segregated MMO, meaning that yeah, the world itself is split between small loading screens, but it also utilizes some of the largest, most expansive zones I have ever seen in an MMO like this, unless you include Final Fantasy XIV's later expansions. Guild Wars 2 also happens to be one of the 10 most played MMOs, so I mean, I don't know what to tell you if that isn't enough to convince you. Okay, so this is the only title in this list that is, well, you know what, it's playable in Korea, it's playable in Japan and Russia, and Amazon have confirmed that they are looking to release it in the West in the first quarter of 2022. So it is 100% playable. I even have a guide on how to play this in English if you're looking to. Much like how Dungeon Fighter Online is a unique horizontal MMO, Lost Ark is an interesting top-down isometric MMO. This is one of a handful of MMOs that make use of this specific graphical style. The world is segregated, zones aren't really too large, but there are plenty of quests, both main and side, that provide ample opportunity to explore. The combat is also some of the most fun I've had in the genre. Having abilities bound to your letter keys makes for some epic combat. However, movement being bound to your left mouse button is just awkward. New World launched a little over a month ago and has become one of the most played MMORPGs right now. Sure, it's had its fair share of bugs and exploits, and Amazon are, well, they are questionable developers thus far. Nevertheless, you cannot deny that underneath, deep down, is an incredibly addictive, enjoyable game. Its large, seamless open world, its basic yet fairly chill combat style. Admittedly, while many of the MMOs listed, Guild Wars 2, Lost Ark, Blade and Soul, all have fantastic narratives, New World, well, it's a bit of a hot mess. But much like Black Desert and Terra, if you just kind of skim over it, you'll probably find yourself having quite a bit more fun overall. Since both PSO2 and PSO2 Genesis are more or less connected, I guess I'll go ahead here and just list the two of them together. PSO2 is a hub MMO that utilizes an action combat system, and PSO2 Genesis is a much larger MMO that utilizes segregated zones, but is much closer to the traditional MMO that we're all used to. New Genesis is absolutely incredible combat. For an anime MMO, you won't really find anything better. They're both very narrative driven and provide the most anime-y experience you'll come across. Admittedly, while New Genesis did launch earlier this year, it's still running very low on content. However, with the announcement that there's an entirely new region coming soon, that's definitely going to change. Soul Worker is my favorite anime MMO. It's one of my favorite MMO of all time, weirdly enough. Like, in the grand scheme of things, there's really nothing about it that's really better than something like PSO2 or Vindictus, yet at the same time, I just find myself more drawn to it repeatedly. I guess it's partly due to the combat. It's fast, it's fluid, and the abilities all look so damn good, or maybe it's due to the absolutely adorable anime aesthetic, because the game, with the single exception of PSO2 Genesis, is by far the best the anime genre has to offer. Soul Worker is a hub MMO though, without an open world to explore, yet at the same time, there are a surplus of different hubs, and even regions connecting every town together that are actually completely cooperative, meaning that you can see other players running around, fighting, or just traveling. Ever since Elian Games reacquired publishing rights for the game, it has averaged tens of thousands of active players logging into play per day, making it one of the most active anime MMOs out there. Terra is, interestingly enough, the MMO responsible for taking me off the market. Yeah, if it weren't for Terra, I never would have met Mrs. Styx. Suffice it to say, this game will always hold a place in my heart, partly because I'd still be single right now, if not for it, and partly because this is the action MMO that I have probably dedicated more time to than any other. At the end of the day, we all have completely subjective opinions of what we consider to be great action combat, to be good MMOs. Terra, to me, while it has become a shell of its former self, still has some of the best action combat in the genre. The world is large and open. I honestly don't recall if they even have open world PvP servers anymore. I don't think so. I feel like most players gave up on the PvP in the game. The narrative is incredibly disconnected from itself now, and you pretty much just run dungeons from level 1 to max level, but in 2021, this is still one of the better action titles out there. Again, it is a shell of what it once was, but I just cannot bring myself to not play it every year. There are a few popular MMOs based on existing franchises. Final Fantasy XIV, the Dragon Quest MMO, Digimon Masters Online, the Elder Scrolls Online. Now, I guess let me preface this entire thing by stating that there are plenty of people here that think the Elder Scrolls Online has some really poor combat. That if you could list any single feature that you think needs improvement, it would be the combat. And while I hate, absolutely loathe animation canceling in video games, The Elder Scrolls Online, I feel like, provides players some decent combat, but it is also simultaneously one of the most freeing titles that I have ever played, allowing you to run around equipping legitimately anything, regardless of your class. Giant axe-wielding healer in heavy boots, heavy pants, and a robe. An assassin wearing heavy armor and wielding a stave. Seriously, it's crazy. Along with a large world, albeit with segregated zones, this game has one of the greatest narratives I have ever had the pleasure of sitting through. This, Final Fantasy XIV, and Star Wars: The Old Republic. And finally, if you hadn't guessed yet, by the way, I have actually been doing this completely alphabetically. Did any of you realize? Anyway, Vindictus, at least to its fans, is generally considered to have the most advanced action combat, being even better than Black Desert or Blade and Soul. And you know what? This is not entirely incorrect. The combat in Vindictus provides unique opportunities that just aren't present in other MMOs, like picking up enemies and using them as weapons, disarming enemies and picking those weapons up to use yourself. The options are limitless. While this is a hub MMO with a few hubs in total, and therefore you spend the majority of your time grinding dungeons, if you're looking for a game that simply allows you to smash some skulls in highly rewarding fashion, then this is it. And that's it. They are... You know what, admittedly, I don't even really know how many MMOs were included in this list. 10 or 20? I don't know, somewhere in between 10 and 20. But these are the action MMORPGs that you should totally be playing, totally be trying in 2021, moving into 2022. Now, if you think that there's a game that I missed that belongs in this list, let me know down in the comment section below. Maybe I will include it in a future list. Someday.